The following program is brought to you by Zencash. You did the work. Zencash helps you get paid.
Thanks for coming out tonight, guys. My name is Andi Galpern. I am the founder of The Design Business. We're an organization that's basically teaching designers how to think and become successful entrepreneurs. I'm here at RallyPad on July 12th, 2012, and I'm excited to interview 3 experts here who have generously contributed their time to the startup community to help you understand how to manage your business appropriately and build confidence and avoid business traps. Tonight's panel consists of attorney Gabe Levine.
Hi.
Insurance broker Jude Winterhalter.
Hello.
And also senior financial strategist David Ehrenberg. Okay, and Gabe Levine is an attorney with Levine & Baker LLP in San Francisco. He represents designers and developers in connection with the wide array of business matters. For 4 years in a row, Gabe has been selected as a Super Lawyer's Rising Star. Wow, Gabe, that's
still rising. I don't know for how long I can rise. But.
Yeah, you will rise. Mm-hmm. He also co-hosts a podcast called Running from the Law with Erica Hall of Mule Design Studio. In addition, we have Mr. Jude Winterhalter of Pembroke Insurance. He's an independent insurance broker here in downtown San Francisco. He's worked with many startups, helping them with their insurance and risk management issues. Jude likes his clients to think of him as his business partner and gives them peace of mind that their assets are covered. We also welcome to the panel senior financial strategist David Ehrenberg from Early Growth Financial Services. They offer a complete suite of services from high-level financial strategy to day-to-day finance, taxes, high-level accounting and administration, and his primary focus is on high-growth technology companies. So we welcome Gabe. How are you doing, Gabe?
I'm good. I'm
good. Very good.
You?
Okay.
Good?
Very good.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have some entrepreneurs here, and a lot of people do ask the question, when you're starting a company, how do you choose an entity? Would you choose an LLC or a corporation?
So the choice of entity or how you want to organize your business with your partners or by yourself involves a number of different factors. The first question I usually ask is whether you intend to get funded or would like to be funded. If you're looking for outside funding from people other than friends and family, most sophisticated angels and venture capitalists want to see a corporation. And in particular, they're fond of Delaware corporations. We don't have to get into the reasons why at this point. But if you're looking for money and you think you have a decent shot, going out and spending the time and the money on a lawyer who knows what he's doing or she's doing to form a Delaware corporation is going to be worth your time. If you're not looking for money, you have a lot more flexibility. And it's not a golden rule, or it is a golden rule, but it's not written in stone. You don't have to form a Delaware corporation if you're looking for money, but it's a good idea. It's going to make the VCs and the sophisticated angels more likely to fund you. Otherwise, you have your choice: partnership, LLC, limited partnership. And a lot of it depends on how much money you want to spend off the bat on an attorney, how much flexibility you need. If you need a lot of flexibility, it might be better to go with an LLC or a partnership because corporations tie you into rules. And if you want to have an S-Corp, which allows the taxes to flow through so that you're not doubly taxed, then you can't have different structures in how you pay yourselves and different structures in how you vote. So you're going to be looking at an LLC or a partnership. And then there's just sort of the time and the energy you want to put into your formation documents and the type of business you want to have, and it's sort of a sliding scale from corporation to LLC to partnership. All of them work, and they can all be appropriate for whatever you're doing for your business. It just depends on how much money, time you want to spend, and what your goals are long term.
Okay. And when all of us, when we were starting a company, we would like to know what kind of legal documentation we would need to form that company. What do you recommend?
Well, so again, it depends on the type of entity you're choosing, which documents you're going to need. If you're forming a corporation, there's you file your certificate or your articles with the Delaware Secretary of State or California or whichever state you're in. By the way, if you're not looking for funding and you want to have a corporation, in my experience, there's little reason for a small development or design shop to be going to another state. You'll just have to pay franchise taxes twice. The $800 you pay to California, you have to pay it to Delaware too, or whatever they're charging out there. So you have your articles, you file them, or your certificate if you're in Delaware, and that forms the company, or your articles of organization as opposed to incorporation for an LLC. And then you have your governing documents, which for a corporation involve bylaws, maybe a shareholders agreement. The bylaws just talk about how you run your company, you have a set of rules applicable. And the shareholders agreement talks about the relationship amongst the shareholders and how they might divvy up certain voting items and restrictions on transfer of the shares. The operating agreement for an LLC works as an all-encompassing document, like a partnership agreement for a partnership. And once you've got your entity documents in place, you're going to need probably some documents for your service providers. If you're using people, this is really important. A lot of people, when they come to me, have already started to get others besides the founders, if you will, to do work, and they haven't documented that. That can present big problems, like, you know, people who at Facebook say, "Oh, I own Facebook," right? You know, I own a piece of that. And they didn't document that because somebody early on said, "I'll give you a % if you do this work." So you want to have your service provider ducks in a row, your employment documents if you have employees, consulting agreements if you have consultants. And then if you're providing actual services as opposed to, say, just developing an app, you're going to want your services agreement with your customers, whether that's an online terms of service or an actual written agreement between you and your customers. And lastly, you might consider trademarks or perhaps even a patent application early in the game. And of course, there's a whole slew of government filings that you need to make, and the government's got its hand in everybody's pie to a great extent these days.
Yep. There,
David can help you with that.
We can talk all about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, we did want to ask one thing, is that having an attorney, an expert attorney on staff is amazing. You know, somebody who knows what they're doing, but not everybody can afford that.
Right.
What do you think about open source legal documents that are online? Like Y Combinator has a series of contracts and prepared documentation. What is the benefit of going with an attorney versus just using that those resources online?
Softball, right? So I think there are some good resources online. I'm not so sure about the Y Combinator documents. With they're excellent documents prepared by an excellent law firm for an excellent company. But they're detailed and they're sophisticated, and what they have to do with is seed funding, your initial round of funding that, you know, might go up to, say, $500,000 for the startup of your company. So they're specific to that, and they have a lot of complicated terms. So you might want to have, if you're taking in $500,000, you're going to want to have a lawyer to understand what those documents mean and make sure that all the provisions are appropriate to you, which they very well might not be. There's also open source documents from Techstars and something else, and they're all done by various big law firms in Silicon Valley that work with a lot of these startups. But other than those documents, I know that there are some, you know, employment forms out there that might be good in, you know, if they're specific to your state. Again, if you have questions about those, you at least want to find an attorney to consult with before using them, so you make sure you don't get yourself into a hole, because those documents are binding. One open source, if you will, document that I like is the AIGA design agreement template. It's got a lot of moving parts, and you have to pick the right moving parts, and it's not perfect, but it's really good for designers looking for something that don't have an agreement in place. I think it's better than nothing, and it's crafted for designers and can work for developers too. So you know, at least as far as forms go, this one was built for you, not for your client.
I will ask you this question. Say that you're a designer, you work really hard for a client, or a developer, you're a consultant, and you run into an issue where all of a sudden they're like, well, this isn't what the work that we wanted, but you have a contract in place, and they decide that they're not going to pay you. How do you, protect yourself? And also, is small claims court worth it?
That doesn't happen, does it? Everybody just pays.
Yeah, everybody pays.
Yeah.
Everybody.
No, this does happen, obviously, a lot. And the design contract's tricky, and the development contract's tricky because the process is, not set in stone in the beginning. You try, but it changes. And clients often have different ideas in their head. So what do you do when the relationship breaks down and the client doesn't want to pay? First, try to work it out. Try to work it out in a way that you're not begging for the money, but you're trying to preserve the relationship. Don't make any deals or agreements to compromise your position unless you're absolutely sure with what you're doing and that you want to compromise your position. But assuming you can't work it out, you can't get paid, then small claims court for anything under $10,000, assuming you're filing suit against a company as opposed to an individual, is definitely worth it. It doesn't take a lot of time, and the court, San Francisco Superior or your local Superior Court, can help you prepare those documents, and you can get a small claims court case on file quickly. There's also collections firms that might be interested in looking at your case. Typically, they want to see something that's more than the small claims limit. But one other resource that I might recommend is the San Francisco Bar Association has a lawyer referral service. And you can, for $25, $30, or maybe it's up to $50, I don't know, get a half hour of actual substantive time with an attorney to see if it's a good fit, or maybe to see if you think you, after talking with that attorney, need to go further and hire one to help you with your dispute. But small claims court, if somebody's not paying you and you think you're owed the money, it's worth it.
Okay. And you don't need a lawyer. You could just go in by yourself.
No lawyers allowed in small claims court.
Okay. There is one thing. You guys, is anybody here in business development? Or do they want to admit it? One person. Okay. So you guys understand negotiating. Attorneys are expert negotiators. Do you have any tips on negotiating with a client, or any way to handle it that could help?
Yeah. So there's two things that I like to suggest to my clients that help me a lot in the negotiation process, because a lot is already agreed to by the time it reaches my desk. Usually a proposal's gone out and people are kind of comfortable, but then the big, long legal document comes along and it has a lot of terms that my client didn't agree to, and starts to realize that this isn't the deal they struck. So when you send out a proposal, to the extent you kind of have a little background knowledge about intellectual property, there's certain rights that you grant to your client, and there's certain rights that you need to keep to yourself, especially as a developer with code, but also as a designer with code, and with certain elements that you reuse in projects over and over again. You'll see them referred to in various contracts as elements, designer tools, developer tools. So if you're going to be selling those things outright, if it's going to be, quote, a work for hire document and characterization without reservation of any rights for yourself, then you need to get a lot more money up front. And the other piece is, if you're going to be providing infringement warranties, you need to get a lot more money up front. And I can, in the question and answer, I can get into more detail about that. So what I suggest is tiered proposals. And you say, this is how much it costs with the license, and this is how much it costs if you're going to be buying it and owning it outright. This is how much it costs if you want a total infringement, warranty guarantee. This is how much it costs if you are just getting only to the extent of our knowledge warranty. That sets it up so that when we get the critical legal issues that come up in these negotiations, if your client goes for the high price, which really needs to be a lot higher, I would suggest, than the other one, because your client doesn't care, by the way. They're going to go with the lower price. So when that document gets in front of their attorney and he starts trying to shove those provisions down your throat that aren't good for you, all I have to do is point back to that proposal and that agreement and say, no, your client didn't go for that option. That's how much that option costs. It makes it really easy, and it seems to work. One other tip, and this is a good one. If they have a lawyer on the phone, you should have a lawyer on the phone. And I really am not a big believer in the lawyer-to-lawyer only call. Get your lawyer, their principal, who's your client contact, and yourself on the phone for a call. This can make everyone, I find, more reasonable, and you hear the conversation. It's also informative for you. You hear the conversation between the lawyer on the other side and their client, and what's really important and what's just over lawyering. And frankly, you can hear that on your side too if your lawyer's over lawyering. So
Okay.
that's my suggestion.
Okay. we're going to go to some audience questions, but before we do that, there actually is a difference from what you guys had told me between an independent contractor, a freelancer, and an employee. What is that difference?
A very amorphous gray line.
Yes.
Yeah, no, this is a mistake. Another mistake, like not documenting the relationship with the service providers that people make. And when they come to me, they have somebody, you know, well, they're gonna come be a contract employee. Wait, okay, so are you gonna withhold taxes and pay taxes to the government or not? What do you mean? No, just they're a contract employee. So the government and the taxing authorities don't care what you think the relationship is. And the government is also in a bit of a hole financially for those of us who have been paying attention to that. So they're looking to close the tax gap, and they're doing that in part. It's less aggressive now than it was a few years ago, but they're looking to do that in part by finding misclassified employees and, you know, looking for back taxes and penalties from the people who employed them. So, you know, if you've got somebody working for you and they've put in a good amount of time, and you say, oh, you know, yeah, you're going to get like $100,000 when we get funded, and you never get funded, you might find yourself in trouble, or you never pay them that money, or you pay an independent contractor $60,000 in a year, and they're sitting in your office, working in your office, and you've got a business title for them, and they've got a business card for your company, and they're not being treated as an employee. They may very well be an employee. So what can happen, for example, not just the taxes, is...
Yes, so it's a state law, actually, that any W-2 employee you have to pay workers' comp insurance on. And so I actually had a client situation, and the client had hired this individual actually only on a part-time basis, but as a developer, and the developer ended up hurting themselves on the job, claimed to be on the job, and so my business owner said, "Well, you're a contractor. I don't cover your workers' comp." And he said, "Well, I actually don't believe I'm a contractor. I think I'm an employee." And so they went back and forth, and he filed a workers' comp claim. And the state made the determination based on a means test. And some of the test questions you got to ask yourself is, are you managing that contractor's time? So do you say when they need to be there, or when they take lunch, et cetera? Are you their only client? So that's a big one. You know, really what you got to ask yourself is, are you the state and the IRS want to know, are you trying to get away from paying taxes and paying workers' comp, et cetera, unemployment tax, et cetera, et cetera? They want to make sure that you're not doing that. So anyways.
And they think you should be doing that for a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, the moral of the story is, of course, as you might imagine, the state determined that this person was in fact an employee, and my client got hit with huge fines. It's triple damages. So the $12,000 that they paid in workers' comp, they ended up costing them, thousands of $36,000 in.
Yeah, the statutory scheme that it says you have to pay, so if you have work comp, and it's inexpensive in your industry, it really is. I just had this conversation with people that just buy work comp and treat them as an employee. Yeah. So it's a big issue. It is a scary issue, and I've seen it happen to people. It doesn't necessarily happen often, but you don't want to get caught. And if you get that one bad seed that ends up ratting you out, then you're on the spectrum of the government agencies, and they play nice with each other. They say, "Oh, you didn't pay us to the EDD," and then the EDD tells the IRS. It's all very incestuous.
It's very common. So of the early stage startups that we work with, I'd say that 50 to 75% of them are violating the rules around contractors versus employees. It's a big issue. It's very easy to do, especially when you're a startup and especially when things are in flux. Yeah, the only concern for the contractor is just making sure that you are in compliance from a tax standpoint yourself. So if you're doing work as a contractor, there's regulations that you need to follow in terms of making sure that you're paying your California state taxes and your federal state taxes, and you want to be in compliance in that way. but that's your only obligation.
Yeah, it's really common right now that people that are using that model, and you don't. So you before you start. This is something that actually we talked about yesterday in preparing. Before you start offering equity pieces to people, you do want to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row. So you've got your company set up, whether it's a corporation or an LLC, because you can't really give out pieces of a partnership, or you're going to want to set up that LLC or that corporation. And ideally, it's a corporation with a stock option plan, and you can issue stock options or actual stock under the plan to service providers, whether they're employees or consultants, outside third-party workers. It's the situation where somebody's working just for a small percentage of the company is dangerous if they can be classified as an employee, because the government wants everybody to be paid minimum wage, and because you have all these other parade of horribles, which, by the way, if someone is a contractor, is coming in or not coming in at all and is working for you on a discrete project and has 3 or 4 other customers and has their own equipment and everything, they may very well be a contractor, and you don't have to treat them as an employee. But the government's just aggressive. That's the point we were trying to make. In any event, you then have the stock option plan, and you issue them in connection with the consulting agreement or the development agreement or the freelance agreement that you give them. They also get a stock purchase or a stock option agreement. And so that agreement controls how many shares they get and the restrictions on those shares and the vesting period, whether it's controlled by amount of time or the completion of certain deliverables, that sort of thing. So you then have to make a few government filings when you set up the company, just setting up the company and issuing what are called exemptions from securities registration. And you do those for each person you issue stock under the stock option plan as well. It's not terribly complicated, but the actual creation of the stock option plan is something that you definitely want to go to a lawyer for. Those aren't like pull down from the internet things. So if you have a contract that says that they're going to give you a certain piece of the company for your work and you've achieved the work, you're owed that piece of the company. So I mean, if they're not going to give it to you with a threatening letter from you or a threatening email, I mean, if you've tried the phone calls and the emails and the letters, and they haven't responded to you, you got to ratchet it up. And so I don't know if you were here when I was saying that the initial step with a lot of lawyers will give you 30 minutes free, and they can't give you, all the advice about your case and review all your documents, but you can at least get a sense. And one of the places that I recommend people try, because it's worth it and it's inexpensive, is the San Francisco Bar Association, which has a lawyer referral service. And you kind of explain to them your problem and get a couple of names and phone calls, and you can go to a meeting for I think it's like $50 or less, and get a half-hour time of actual substantive advice. But if you have an agreement, I mean, there's a lot of nuances to these agreements. But if you have an agreement that says we're going to give you, 1% of the company for you doing X, and you've done X, you're owed 1% of that company. I think getting good advisors in place is important, and I'm not just plugging these guys, but I often tell people that come to me to form an LLC just for liability protection. Forget about it. Talk to my friend and colleague Jude and get yourself some good insurance. And are you paying your taxes on time, and are you keeping your books? Because that's more important than, quite frankly, what you're going to get from a lawyer, in my opinion. So getting a good insurance, making sure you're covered from insurance, which doesn't have to be that expensive, and making sure that you're doing the right things from an accounting and tax standpoint are, besides getting a lawyer to just help you with your initial documents, are really, really important.
That's a great setup.
I love you, Gabe.
Well, because if you were, as you mentioned, if you were to, if there were a lawsuit that were to come forth, then you were protected with liability insurance, which is really important.
Yeah, I'll leave it for Jude, but the one really important, I hate litigation. I'd spent the first 4 years of my career almost doing exclusively litigation, and now I'm doing far less of it. It's a total waste of money most of the time. And people are banging heads, and it is so expensive to pay even an okay lawyer to take a business case from start to finish through trial is really expensive. So liability insurance, if you buy the right insurance and have an advisor to tell you what that insurance is, can cover all of those attorney's fees and cover the settlement of the case. So save your company.
Okay, and we're going to move on to insurance. Jude Winterhalter. Hi, Jude. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. All of us probably would like to know a little bit about health insurance, and what do startups usually do to cover health insurance?
Well, they get an employers-based health program, and what most people don't realize is actually it only takes 2 W-2 employees to get a guaranteed cost issued policy either through Aetna or Kaiser or what have you. So it doesn't. You do need 2 people, but it can be pretty cost effective to do it that way.
Okay. And how many people? You said 2 people
Yes.
to be in a company.
Yes.
Okay. So.
But the key here is they have to be W-2 employees. You can have many contractors, but it has to be a minimum of 2 W-2 employees.
So does that make sense to everybody? Or
Yes.
Okay. So.
What about a founder who's not necessarily W-2? I think it works.
Yeah.
But you
Yes.
have to be paying yourself, right? Is
Yes.
that how it works? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. What percentage when an employer is covering health insurance, what is the percentage required?
Well, there's a state law. Actually, there's a city and state law that the employer has to cover a minimum of 55% of the employee's cost of the insurance. So you got to start there, and then it just depends on what you want to do for your employees. Some of my clients cover 100%, some cover 75%, all the way down to the 55%. So it all just depends on what is affordable.
And are they required to have health insurance in all of the U.S. or is California?
No. There's no requirement that you have health insurance.
Okay.
Yeah, with the exception of San Francisco's law, which is applicable to, I'm not going to get it right off the top of my head, but some threshold number of employees.
Yes, it's 20.
20 employees. So if you employ 20 people full-time?
Yes.
Full-time.
Full or part-time.
Full or part-time. A lot of restaurants, for example. You guys probably remember hearing about this. It's why your check now has the extra fee for the SF healthcare.
Yes.
Because the city of San Francisco has said if you employ 20 people, you
Yes.
have to provide a certain level of healthcare or money into the bank for healthcare.
Yeah, it's universal health care in San Francisco, which actually I think is a good thing.
Yeah, good policy.
Yeah.
Expensive, but good.
Yeah.
We did talk about liability insurance. How much does that usually cost for, is there a range?
Yes,
Okay.
so there's a range, but first you really have to talk about what type of liability insurance. There's 2 types. There's general liability, but really for most of the people in this room, that really doesn't apply to you. So general liability is, for instance, here tonight, RallyPad has a general liability policy, and they're really just covering slip and falls or the lights falling down or something like that. The thing about general liability policy that everyone out there needs to realize is that it doesn't cover your work. So your work product is excluded under a general liability policy. So you're really not getting much covered. So what you have to do is you then look to a different type of policy to get that covered, and that's called professional liability or an E&O policy. So a general liability policy is not expensive. It probably runs you $400 a year, but again, you're not really getting much covered. Professional liability policy, an E&O policy, starts at about $1,000, but really that's what you want. That's what's going to cover your work product. And when we say covered, what we're doing is we're covering you. The insurance company is standing in front of you to defend you if you've caused financial harm to a client. And so that's really what the policy is there to do. You've caused financial harm to a client, they've come to you and threatened to sue you, and your carrier is going to stand in front of you and defend you.
And I go, do you have insurance? Yes. Awesome.
Yeah. Actually, my father has a building. We're from North Miami, and his building caught on fire maybe like 15 years ago, and because of insurance, it was able to, he was able to recover and rebuild. and he's always saying, "Get insurance." So
Insurance is a good thing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's important. Is there any other type of insurance besides liability insurance that you would recommend to startups or for new businesses?
Well, in general, what you're going to find with insurance is that you need to get a basic policy in place. I would recommend, for most of the people out there, I would recommend a minimum E&O policy. And then what you're going to do is you're going to find that it's really driven by events. And what I find for a lot of my startups, especially in this type of design developer world, is a client, typically a larger client, is going to ask you or demand within that contract that Gabe was just talking about, they're going to demand a certain level of insurance. And that's really kind of the event that drives insurance coverage a lot of times. Either it's you're signing a lease or you have a new client, a big new client that has, paragraphs of insurance requirements. And what you got to realize too there is that the insurance requirements are very boilerplate. And what a lot of my clients don't realize is that a lot of this is negotiable, correct?
Yeah, you do. You see these big paragraphs with any big company in their master services agreement or their master consulting agreement. They want $3 million of CGL, $2 million of EPL or E&O. And it is negotiable with some of them to a certain extent, but often that's how, Jude and I come in contact with, the same new client is my client has to get an insurance policy or a bump. And then the other, I think EPLI is something worth talking about for people with employees.
What is EPLI?
EPLI is, so that stands for Employment Practices Insurance. And so what that is that covers you for allegations of sexual harassment, wrongful termination, situations like that. So that is another policy that you, especially in the startup world, it's really, let's be honest, it's kind of, it's a loosey-goosey environment. Which can be great, but it does end up putting company at risk because of situations that occur.
I think one other area that it's probably worthwhile for Jude to talk about is most companies that are getting venture capital funding are required to get something called D&O insurance, which is directors and officers insurance.
Yes.
And it's something that almost all investors require, and it's part of every term sheet that we see.
Yeah, and again, that's another event, just like the big client contract. On an offer sheet from a venture company is going to require you to carry directors and officers insurance. And what you're doing with that insurance is you're actually protecting yourself and the company in case any decision that's made as the board causes financial harm to the investor. So the investor is going to come after the board because they're going to say, hey, you made a bad decision. You cost me, $3 million. I'm suing you. And that D&O insurance is going to stand in front of you and defend you. Yes. So the dividing line on the situations of copyright and infringement are often included in an errors and omissions policy. And it goes all the way up to patent infringement. So most E&O policies will cover everything up to patent infringement. And if you need patent infringement insurance, that's a big ticket. But
if you're making the money, it's worth it because one nice solid patent troll coming along and nailing you with a patent litigation case, and you're done.
Okay, what about?
Well, hold on a second. So I just wanted just to give you just an example. So
sorry, Andy.
So,
I'll wait.
so like I said, so a minimum E&O policy, for a startup is about $1,000. A minimum patent infringement policy that's going to defend you is $20,000. So you can kind of see the level of difference in the pricing.
Hence the markup too. If you get a client that's willing to pay that markup, that's what you use it for. Go buy yourself some patent insurance.
That's the reason you have insurance.
Yes.
You have insurance to a large extent
Yeah.
in case you make a mistake.
In case you make a mistake. I mean, errors and omissions, right? Just by the very definition of it. You've made an error. It's caused financial harm to your client. That's why you have the insurance.
But make sure, though, one of the reasons I like Jude is because he understands your business. You go out and get just some insurance broker, I don't know, there's ads on the radio for insurance brokers. I don't know them. They have to know your business and understand this tech stuff is changing.
Yes.
And there's new riders on these policies and amendments that are being made all the time. I don't understand it. So I look to him to say, is my client's particular business covered for this? Developing an application that does this. Stores medical information. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
I just want to mention one other thing, too. You just can't do anything illegal. Which
How do you know?
can't get covered for anything illegal, yeah.
I chopped off his hand.
What about workers' comp? Are they? How does that work usually?
Yeah, so it's, as we mentioned earlier, just real briefly, it's a state law that anyone that you're paying through W-2 or possibly, it's the gray area with the contractors. We already talked about that. You have to cover their workers' comp. But as I said, it's pretty inexpensive. It's, a clerical person's probably about 60 cents per $100 of payroll. A developer's 20 cents per $100 of payroll. So it's very low risk from a workers' comp point of view.
But for the if somebody is having a more dangerous, working a more dangerous job, is it going to cost more for an employer? Or?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So it you open a retail store, it's probably $5 per $100 of payroll, and then if you're a general contractor and someone's getting on a roof, it's $50 per $100 of payroll. So it all just depends on the risk of the business.
Okay. Risky business.
Risky business.
Okay. And here we will ask a question that kind of bridges the gap between insurance and also finances. And that is a startup required to cover unemployment insurance?
Yes.
Well, it goes back to this question of whether or not it's a contractor or an employee.
Yeah.
And if you have an employee that's working for you, you certainly are required to cover unemployment insurance. And there's both California and federal unemployment insurance benefits that you need to pay. But it goes back to this whole question of, is it a contractor or is it an employee?
Okay. We'll move into finance because everybody likes money, right? So when it comes to taxes, David, how do you stay out of trouble when you're doing taxes?
So everybody's favorite topic, taxes. There are, for companies that get started, they start having revenue, they need to start worrying about a whole myriad number of taxes. So there's state and federal taxes that you need to file, and you need to pay state and federal taxes on a quarterly basis, so 4 times a year. You also need to take care of a bunch of other government taxes and fees, including your state business license, oftentimes your city business license. You need to take care of things like 1099s on an annual basis. You need to take care of payroll taxes, depending on where you live. There's a whole myriad of different taxes that you need to make sure that you're taking care of every year and on a recurring basis. What we advise companies to do is once you get incorporated, once you get set up, after you start working in operations, find a tax advisor that's out there. There's a lot of great folks that do this work. Our firm does this work. There's a lot of other great folks that do it. And hire them. And they will take care of ensuring that you are following all these different regulations because, frankly, it's a pain in the ass. There's a lot of different things that you need to worry about. And if you're like most of the entrepreneurs I know, you want to be worried about creating a product, creating strategic relationships, building a business. The last thing in the world you want to think about is taxes. So just know that you have to worry about that shit. Go out and find someone that can take care of it.
Plus, you accept the liability of that, which is key.
Which is great.
Yeah.
A lot of people use different, TurboTax or QuickBooks. Is there one that you recommend for a billing system?
So as you set up your organization, as you set up your entity, regardless of whether it's a corporation or an LLC or another type of business entity, you're going to have to figure out how you want to track all of your financial transactions. and how you want to track the expenses that you pay, how you track the revenue that you want to, that you're earning, and how you are tracking all of your obligations and your billing. We commonly see QuickBooks, and that's probably the number one system that we see out there. Probably about 80% of our clients use QuickBooks. It's relatively inexpensive. It's relatively easy to use. Larger companies use more sophisticated systems. You all probably heard of NetSuite, or Microsoft has a whole system, a whole series of different programs called Microsoft Dynamics. And the larger you get, the more complicated these systems get. We're also seeing a lot of very lightweight cloud-based systems like Indenaro and Mint that people are starting to use. Those are typically used to just track your expenses. They're not a full-fledged accounting system. So in the same way that you're going to take a look at what the entity is and how you want to set up the structure of your business, you also want to look at what your needs are and find this accounting system that meets your needs best. And think about not only where you are today, but where you want to be in 5 years or where you want to be in 10 years so that you have a system that can grow with your business as your business grows. If you want to get venture funding, and if you're trying to grow a business that is at some point going to either have an exit that's going to be acquired or theoretically go for an IPO, you want to make sure that whatever accounting system that you use allows something called dual entry accounting, which means that it allows you to do generally accepted accounting principles, which means that there's two sides of every equation, so that there's debits and credits, which is a bunch of accounting mumbo jumbo for basically a sophisticated system that's doing more than just tracking your expenses. So it's the one thing I would recommend that you really look at. So.
Okay. And how much money does a startup usually have to hire a financial advisor?
It depends on the complexity of the company and what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. We typically start working with companies when they close a seed round of funding. So most of our clients have raised anywhere between $400,000 to $1.5 million, and they're in a high growth mode. But there's a lot of companies that are out there that never go out and raise any money that need a financial advisor because they've got a lot of activity, they have a lot of expenses, and they have revenue. So it's one of those situations where the activity that you're having and the complexity of your business will let you know when you need to bring someone in.
Mm-hmm. And what if you can't afford to hire a financial advisor? What do you suggest? Because everybody wants to make sure that their business is on the right track, but we can't afford to hire the resources, to make sure that that's happening. Do you have any suggestions?
So if you don't have the money to hire a ongoing financial advisor who's going to come in and do your day-to-day accounting and your bookkeeping, then you should find a CPA firm that can help you with your regulatory compliance. So they can help you with all the taxes that we talked about before. So a firm that you're still going to need to pay them money. So there's no way to get away from the fact that there is a cost associated with this. But there's a lot of firms that will just make sure that you're taking care of all of your taxes and that you're taking care of all of your other obligations and that you're staying on track in that way. And that's a lower cost alternative. So your first year, you sort of get a free pass. So you incorporate sometime during 2012. You'll have to file taxes at the beginning. You'll have to file a tax return at the beginning of 2013. But then throughout 2013 and ongoing, you'll have to do a quarterly return. You'll have to do a quarterly filing.
Whether you're an LLC or an S-Corp.
Whether you're an LLC or an S-Corp or a C-Corp.
Okay.
And a CPA an accountant can set you up at the beginning of the year too. At the end of your first year, they can help you estimate the taxes for the next year and give you, I love this, give you little stubs, and then you just, on this date, I just write this check. Yeah. I don't even have to think about it.
So all of our clients, so we do their taxes once a year, and then they have all the information that they need for their filings throughout the year, and then we'll engage with them again on their taxes on an annual basis.
Okay. And we'll go ahead and talk about valuation. How does an equity valuation work?
So
here we go. Here's the good stuff.
So an equity valuation is when you are raising capital from an outside investor. And that can be from an angel investor or from a venture capital investor. And they're coming in and they're giving you a certain amount of money and they're taking a certain percentage of ownership of your entity. You're basically selling off a piece of your company. And the price that you use for that and what you're selling, what the value of your company is, really varies. There's not a set formula there. There's not a stock answer for that. The valuation is going to depend on what the business is that you're doing, how many different investors are interested in what you're doing, what the revenue potential is, what the founding team looks like, what the potential exit is for the business. There's a lot of different variables that come into play in determining your value. Unfortunately or fortunately, in the world that we live in here in the Bay Area, there's also trends. 5 years ago, we saw a lot of clean technology companies that were getting incredibly high valuations. A year ago, we saw a lot of social media companies that were getting very high valuations. Today, we're seeing a lot of cloud computing and mobility companies that are getting high valuations. So unfortunately or fortunately in this area, VCs follow trends and certain things are hot at certain times, and that has a huge impact on the valuation. But if you're going out and selling part of your company, what I would recommend is talk to a lot of other entrepreneurs that are out there, find out what their values are for their company, have a good understanding of what your potential exit is, what the market is for your idea, and try and understand what going rates are. And then understand what terms like pre and post money mean. So of the folks here, are any of you does anyone here work for a venture-backed company? And do you have options, stock options? Okay. So because of Enron, the federal government created something called Sarbanes-Oxley. And it was a bunch of different rules and regulations. And one of those rules said, if you work for a privately held company and you own common stock or common stock options, you need to have those options professionally valued. So a 409A valuation is a professional valuation that is done on common stock for privately held companies. It's a ridiculous exercise. It basically just costs every company we work with $5,000 to $7,000 every year, and the answers that they come up with are fairly stock, but it's the price for your common stock options. So, one important point, and then I'll answer both those questions. But on the common stock options, if you are giving out options, you do need to worry about what the valuation is for those options, and you need to make sure you're following the rules on it.
And the people receiving the options need to worry too.
Yep.
And the 409A sets see, this is again the government not getting its money. I don't hate the government, by the way. I pay my taxes. But see, if you could just give stock or options to employees, or you could backdate the options so that they weren't, worth the $10 that they're worth today, but the dollar before that they were worth, then the government's only getting $1 worth of taxable income to the employee on that go around of that transaction, and the government will only see money again if and when that employee sells that stock. So the government wants this money now. So somebody out there does a valuation and says it's worth this amount of money, and then at the time that stock is sold, somebody has to pay some money for that sale transaction.
All right. So, space in the startup industry. What kind of funding is there, and what is the process?
So, if you're a early stage technology company and you're looking for equity funding, there's what they call rounds of funding that you can receive. typically what we see is early stage companies, the first round of funding they ever get will be a friend and family round, where they will go out to people that they know, members of their family, people in their network that have money, and they'll raise money from those folks. It's called a friend and family round. Next, we typically see companies go out and raise angel funding. And especially right now, we're seeing a lot of super angels that are very active in the Bay Area. These are sophisticated investors who are making a lot of bets in the technology space. You know, people like Ron Conway and David McClure and Mike Maples that are very active right now in this space. They're doing angel funding. And then beyond friend and family rounds and angel funding, there's venture rounds. And they typically refer to venture rounds based on the series that it is. So Series A would be your first venture round. A Series B would be your second. A Series C would be your third.
How does the company prepare for funding to go for a venture?
So, and Gabe should definitely jump in on this, but when you go out to raise funds from professional investors, you need to have all of your T's crossed and all of your I's dotted. You need to have your legal documents taken care of, which Gabe can talk about, but you also need to really understand what your business is, what your potential is for your business in terms of your revenue opportunity, in terms of your market share and your market space, and you need to have a story about what the trajectory will be for your business.
Okay, we're going to buy your company for $2 million. Great, I'm going to be rich. Then the due diligence comes from the people who are going to plop that money down, and they do two things. They do your financial due diligence, checking on all your books to make sure what you're saying about your company is true. And so you got to have a good set of books, what you're saying your company's making and what it's worth and is true and accurate. And so somebody like David's company needs to be there to have either done that for you all along, which is best, or bring you up to speed so that you can present those books to the company that's acquiring you so they can send it to their really expensive accountants to review and ask you a lot of questions about. And then you got to do the same thing with your legal documents. So they want to see a corporate book for the corporation that includes your founder stock purchase agreements, all of those IP agreements that I was talking about, where every service provider you've hired to do any sort of creative work, development, design, business planning, has signed a document assigning the intellectual property rights and waiving their rights to the intellectual property. So that book of agreements, and your insurance, they want to see that you have your insurance plans which go into that corporate book. So you get your ducks in a row, both from an accounting and legal standpoint, and then you can present a nice, clean package when they do their due diligence.
And were there any books or anything that you recommended in terms of preparing for a venture round?
No, you.
Yeah, so, a book that's become a bit of a Bible in the Bay Area is Guy Kawasaki's Art of Start. And Guy Kawasaki was the founder of Garage.com. He's a very colorful character that's become somewhat of an icon in the Bay Area. And he wrote a book called The Art of Start, which is a great primer on how do you get ready to raise angel and venture money, and what are the steps you need to put in place, and how do you prepare a presentation, and what should be in your presentation, and what are the questions you need to think about, and the things that you need to have answered, and what are the due diligence items that you need to get ready. So if you are going down that road, it's an easy read. It's called Guy Kawasaki's The Art of Start. So you can also YouTube him, and there's some colorful presentations that he's done.
Okay. Also, we'll talk about term sheets real quick. Why should I care about a term sheet? So
this is another question that Gabe probably has more insight into than I do, but
unlikely.
When you go out and you raise a venture round, you will meet with angel investors or venture capitalists, and as part of the negotiation process, at some point, they will provide you with a term sheet. And the term sheet outlines all of the deal points for raising that venture round of capital. And there's typically 9 or 10 different items that we tell our entrepreneurs and our companies to really concentrate on. Gabe can give a little bit more color on it, but we do have on our website, we have a blog that's dedicated to things to think about for your term sheet and things to consider.
No, just go to his blog.
Is it earlygrowthfinancialservices.com?
Yeah, no,
okay.
Yep, right.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
Right. No, I mean, term sheet, typically they're non-binding except for the confidentiality provisions, and sometimes they have what's called a no-shop provision. So while this term sheet, during its 60-day term, sometimes also called a letter of intent, while it's pending and you guys are doing your negotiation for the finalized documents and people are doing that due diligence, you can't shop your company around to others for investment. So the confidentiality provision and the no shop are typically all that's binding. And then the other stuff is important nonetheless because it sets the tone for the negotiation, just like the proposal I was talking about for the master services agreement. And if the money in particular, you want to make sure that the money terms are set forth, and there's going to be oftentimes a holdback. So I'd say that's something to look for. Somebody's going to buy you for $2 million, but there's an earn-out or a holdback, and you have to work you're the talent. They want to buy you to a certain extent a lot of times. And so you have to work for the acquirer for 3 years. That earn-out and holdback is a really important provision. Anyway, yeah, check out the blog. It's good.
What we see a lot in early stage raises is that instead of doing an equity round where you're negotiating what the value of your company is and selling off a piece of your company, for early stage rounds, a lot of what we're seeing is convertible debt. And what convertible debt does is it says, look, we're going to give you a certain amount of money. We're going to give you $500,000 or we're going to give you $1 million. And it's going to be debt. So it will have typical debt terms in that it will have a maturity date. So this money is owed back to us in a year or 2 years. And it will have an interest rate associated with it. But it also has a provision in it that says that if you raise an equity round at a later date, the debt that you have been given will convert into that equity round at some type of a discount. And that's very, very common. Does that make sense? It's kind of complicated. But basically, it looks like debt, but if you raise money later on, the folks that hold the debt can participate in the equity round at a discount. And it's typically somewhere between 15 to 30% is a discount.
And people prefer that for a couple reasons. One, it's not giving away an actual piece of the company yet. And two, it's cheaper to put those together from a legal standpoint.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, you should definitely try to get venture debt because it allows you runway to really increase the valuation of your company. So you're starting out, you need some seed capital. Your company's not really worth much. It's just an idea. Maybe it's an idea and you and 4 buddies. But if they give you $1 million, you can do a heck of a lot with that $1 million in terms of creating value so that when you go out and raise an equity round, your company's going to be worth much more after you've spent that $1 million than it was before you spent it.
What happens if you lose the $1 million? It's just gone from the...
It's just gone.
It's just gone.
It's gone.
It's still venture debt and convertible debt is still risk.
You need
it's
to be
risk
careful
capital.
how you lose it.
Yeah.
If you lose it in a houseboat for yourself, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, would you owe anything to the venture capitalists? So that's
why you have to be
That's why they're
careful.
granting it to you, basically.
You have to lose that money in normal operations in the course of business, but it's risk capital.
Yeah.
So everything in this arena is risk capital. Everyone understands the rules.
I think the difference between what's happening now, and it's really palpable for us in the Bay Area, I think more than the rest of the country, to a huge extent, has a little more solid footing than what would happen before because people are offering actual services and that make money. At least that seems to be idea, but we are starting to trend towards the next best application that doesn't make money but is going to be a photo thing on your phone that sells for $1 billion. And so, there's always things are going really good right now. It seems for us in the Bay Area and developers and designers, and it will probably even off at some point. But I don't think we're heading towards a financial crisis like we saw in 2008 anytime real soon.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The thing that concerns me is, I'll just give you one example, which we kind of looked at this week, which is commercial real estate. So 100 Townsend just got leased. It was $65 a square foot. So it's Soma to a tech company. That's the same price you can get at one Embarcadero for a water view, $65 a square foot. So to me, that says to me on the tech side that it's really unsustainable. I think
Somebody made a stupid choice.
Someone made a stupid choice, but I mean, I think you kind of see what I'm getting at is we are putting a lot of pressure here in the area on our infrastructure, and I'm just interested to see how that will play out on a local basis. Yes?
So what is your point with that, that the startup or whomever got charged more just because it was a startup?
They were willing to pay more.
They were willing to pay more. I don't think that was very smart for them to pay $65 a square foot when they could be sitting in one Embarcadero with an ocean, with a water view. I mean, to me, that just sounds kind of crazy.
Indication of money to throw.
I will say that Google and Facebook and Apple, they all have shuttles that come in and pick everybody up, and everybody wants to be in the city. They want to be working in the city, and that's where the talent is. So the price is going to go up in real estate, and that is, I think the waterfront property is probably going to be even higher. So,
well, maybe. I'm just saying that's putting. To me, it's putting a lot of pressure on our infrastructure.
Yeah.
So
let's ask the guy who knows. No.
I don't know about that, but I would definitely say we're in a bubble. So I would say that it is a isolated bubble, and it's only in certain sectors, and that there are probably 5 or 6 sectors where it exists. But I would say that we are absolutely, unquestionably in a bubble in those sectors. And I think there's a lot of things feeding it, but I think that the bubble is mobility, gaming, social media, cloud-based companies, and software as a service. And I would also say that the bubble is particularly evident with early stage companies because we have a huge number of active angel investors, and that number is increasing with Zynga's IPO and with Facebook's IPO. And so there is a lot of money going to early stage companies, and the valuations for those companies are not realistic, and most of those companies are not going to survive.
I also think I think that also some of this is relating to people's background and education and not going to the right resources of law, of accounting, not having the right, basically like the right fundamentals of business. And they're getting money, but they don't know what to do with it or don't plan it out strategically. So it's going to fail. So it's important that they know all of this information.
So what you're saying, Andy, is they should give all that money to their lawyers.
Yeah, they should. Well, and I think they should plan their business for the long term to be able to succeed. And, there's a lot of different ideas out there, but don't move forward too much unless it's starting to grow a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Instagram's so tough. So
users, right?
Yeah,
information.
They're looking at users. I think Facebook was also looking at a hole in their application suite that they needed to fill, and they thought they needed to fill quickly. But I think Instagram, it's very difficult to take that acquisition and derive a lot of information from it because it was such a complete one-off system. So we actually, the first investor in Instagram is a man named Steve Anderson, and we do the work for about 80% of his companies. And for some unknown, godforsaken reason, we did not have Instagram as a client, which I think I will go to my death regretting. But
I think the people are a lot of the power. He's right about Instagram because it was Facebook, but people are looking for information on potential buyers. I guess advertising on the net is still powerful, although not as much. And it's just, Google has got massive amounts of information on all of us, and so that's become a valuable asset in and of itself. And tweets, worlds and worlds of tweets with information in them. It's just somewhat fascinating, but.
There's also a bit of a publicity stunt is how I view it. Like the Facebook seems to be, afraid of losing their value. So they buy something to try to make themselves look like they're going to be the future. And
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Those are good. Those types of things are good because if they're the ones if they're handling payment of taxes and withholding and that sort of thing, then the government's getting its piece of the pie, and they're not going to be coming after you for it. So I like those types of services.
Except for that they don't pay designers. Designers don't like those services.
Well, yeah, they might not. Yeah. They might not pay fair wage.
They're not in our favor, but
bad. They're bad.
We had okay, and one more question, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up.
I've got some red flags.
Red flags for employees of startups.
Wishy-washy.
Before you hire somebody.
Yeah, wishy-washy promises that don't come through on paper.
Okay.
We're going to give you this, and then this is the type of thing that I can look at an offer letter and ask a client, and most semi-decent employment lawyers with anybody with background in employment can do this. What do you think you're getting? Well, I think I'm getting $150,000 a year or $100,000 a year plus a bonus of this, and 2% of the company that vests over 4 years. And then you look at the offer letter, and after parsing through the legalese, you realize that it's terminable at any time. They can let you go next week, and you wouldn't have any acceleration. They can let you go in a year just before the cliff, and you wouldn't have any acceleration. So you're at risk. You're exposed to get none of the company. This bonus is completely at the discretion of the board, and you don't necessarily get anything. There's so when I see that sort of, some of these things are typical, but when I see that sort of promise that I speak with someone who has a clear understanding of what they're getting and it's not reflected in the paper, that's a red flag for me.
And I guess I would say always remember as an employee that the government is on your side, both the city and the state government. So use groups like the EDD and the Department of Labor, et cetera, because companies need to follow rules and laws, and if they're not, then that gives you a big bargaining power within that situation.
I would say, if you're a employee for a startup company or a potential employee for a startup company, when you're trying to decide if you want to join that company, have a very candid conversation with the company about their funding. So understand exactly how much money they've raised, understand who they've raised the money from, and understand what their burn rate is. And the burn rate is how quickly they're spending that money. Because when you start with a company, you want to know if that company has 6 months more of life or 18 months more. And I think you should be very comfortable having those kinds of conversations so that you really understand how long that company is viable for and what the risks are associated with joining that company.
And do they actually show you those papers? If they won't show you those papers, is that a red flag?
It depends. Well, sometimes the company doesn't have those papers, right? So sometimes a company doesn't have their financial projections. If it's a very early stage company, they're not going to necessarily have something to show you. Mm-hmm. But they should be comfortable having a candid conversation with you about it. And you should have a good understanding of what that means. The other thing I would say is educate yourselves a little bit about equity structure, because in the example that Gabe gave, if you come into a company and they promise you 2% of the company and the company has just raised a seed round of funding, 3 years from now and 4 more rounds from now, that 2% is going to be worth a lot less.
Yeah, it's a super tough. I mean, most employees are not going to get any sort of liquidation, dilution protection, meaning your stock may be 2% now, but it's going to go down when they take in future money. So the equity component is usually a pretty big gamble.
Yeah. So understand it.
Yeah.
and understand what it means and what it looks like, and understand what you can expect in terms of dilution. And dilution is just a term that means how your equity is going to lose value over time.
More shares issued, less your share becomes less of the total dollar value that's paid for the acquisition of the company, for example. Yeah.
And also, one other thing that I could give advice for a designer who run, to make sure that you guys get paid is maybe get a retainer, and then if the client believes in you and trusts your business enough, then they will give that to you. Like you say, like I want $2,000 for this project for 10 hours or 20 hours of work. And if they're not willing to pay that up front, then it might be a red flag that they don't believe in your work or that they don't have the money for it. So there's a lot of ways to protect yourself to make sure that you can get paid. And also,
when in doubt, increase the deposit.
What did you say?
When in doubt, increase the
Increase
deposit.
the deposit. Yeah, I definitely agree. Okay, we have to go ahead and wrap up, but we're gonna have everything. Have you guys up here for Q&A from the audience? If
Or
you guys
back at
wanna
the beer.
Come up or go grab beer. If there's pizza left, feel free to help yourself. And thank you guys for coming out. David, Jude, Gabe, you guys are awesome.
Thank you, Andy.
for contributing.
Thank you all for coming out.
And for teaching the startup community and myself. You guys taught me a lot. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you guys for all coming out.